I guess I came a bit early.
No, I think you're almost right on time. I think we're getting. Looks like it's starting to kind of pick up now. Got John and Kevin coming in. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how many people we get from, the Pacific world, because
I live on the West Coast, so I picked this one.
we had a lot of Europeans this morning or at noon. Seemed like a long time ago now to me.
How many people were there at noon?
About 35, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, it was. It was a pretty good. I thought it was a pretty good start. We got some things that people decided to stick some things into the vault afterwards to try to kind of better plan for the next one than I had for this one to read. They've got some reflections. They've got questions. Some people have put in. So I think that is probably something that we'll do. Oh, Maggie, hi. Welcome back.
Back for more.
All right. Cool. Thanks for showing me how to do that. I'm going to practice that a little bit in my own personal vault. And then that was actually where the wheels kind of came off in that third Rome Book Club when Bo started doing that with the block quoting, and I was like, I was not following. So and I don't know if that
Oh, did anyone bring up that another way to do block quotes in Obsidian is you do double brackets and then double caret? So you do caret, caret, and then after that you can just type in text from any paragraph, and it will search your entire vault.
Yeah, I think that's what you were talking about, the global search.
Global
right?
block search, yeah. So if you do caret, caret, that's global block search. If you do pound, pound, that's global header search.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, pound, pound is global header. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. So yeah, because I was going through, I think it was Eric's he did a long kind of a long note on chapter 1, and I was kind of in the middle of it, and he said something that I wanted to respond to. I thought, I can't do it here because, and I can't go to the bottom because it's, pages and pages later. So that is something that I guess in this format I will probably need to learn to do. So that's what's cool about this. So in any case, it is 2 minutes past the hour. We'll probably continue to have people arriving, but I did want to respect everybody's time and get going on time. So to begin with, I'll introduce myself, and then I will nominate Greg again to introduce himself the way I did this morning, and then he can pick somebody, and we'll continue that way. So I am relatively new to Obsidian. I've been using it for about a year. Before that, I used Rome Research for a couple, I don't know, half a year, maybe 3/4 of a year. Before that, I had a bunch of things that I used. I used Tinderbox a long, long time ago, and it was, I found it very, I found the visualness of it very appealing, but the arbitrariness of it, not so much. And then I tried just organizing my dissertation on cards in Scrivener, which actually kind of worked for me because my dissertation was based on a bunch of handwritten personal letters from the 19th century, a big chunk of it. And so I was able to, I had hundreds of them. And so I was able to arrange them that way. So I've been very interested in this. I've also been interested in using it as a teaching tool. So I will talk a little bit at the noon meeting, Chris Aldrich suggested that I talk a little bit about that. So I'll do that after everybody's introduced themselves. But that's who I am. I teach history to undergrads at a small university in northern Minnesota. So Greg, you're up.
Hi, my name is Greg Rapp. I am from New Mexico, which we keep having this bipolar weather back and forth. I've been using Obsidian for probably about 6 months, roughly. I actually found Dan's videos on YouTube, which a lot of people I'm sure are probably familiar with. And I've tried Roam. I've tried, was it Evernote, OneNote, Scrivener, you name it, just to try to compile information for projects. And I found each one annoying, except for Obsidian, where I like the markdown. It's a little bit cleaner, in my opinion, in that regard. I can manipulate things a little better. And I teach English and political science at a local community college, and I'd like to try to bring some of this into my classes, because students tend to take notes and then forget about them. And then you're talking about something like, hey, we talked about this, right? And they're like, yeah, sure, right? You know, so yeah, so that's one of my goals too, is trying to help students and really anybody kind of retain information, but also put that information to use for future projects and stuff like that. So I guess I'll nominate Maggie.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie. I'm an assistant professor at Swarthmore College, which is basically right outside Philadelphia. I guess I used Evernote for a really long time. And then one day during the pandemic, I wanted to go back to notes that I took during my PhD 5 years ago, and they were awful and I couldn't find anything, or there were no notes. So since then, I kind of went down the rabbit hole. I use Roam a lot and have run one of the Roam book clubs. But I've also been using Obsidian for my personal notes for the last several months. So I'm really interested to see how the differences between running a book club in Roam versus in Obsidian. And I already wrote a little article about it that you can read in the vault. But so far it seems really cool and exciting to see how people are contributing to each other and kind of already generating really useful reference information. I'm also really interested in the book because I teach inclusive engineering design, so we talk a lot about equity, and it would be really interesting to learn more about history and how that relates to it.
Yeah.
I'm going to pass it to Mike Kramer.
Hi, everyone. I know Maggie from the Rome Book Club. I led a Rome Book Club as well. Unlike Maggie, I know almost nothing about Obsidian. I feel like I'm fumbling my way around the vault so far, but I'm enjoying it. It seems pretty intuitive. My academic training has been in philosophy, and at times in my life, I have taught university courses in philosophy, as well as quote unquote great books courses on Western civilization, including readings on Locke and Hobbes and Rousseau and Marx and the kinds of social theorists that are being discussed in The Dawn of Everything. I am not all the way through The Dawn of Everything, but a few years ago, just, for my own entertainment, I read Graeber's Debt, the first 5,000 years, and was blown away by it. It just opened up a perspective on the origin of money that I had never been exposed to. And I thought it was really creative and just a pleasure to read. So I was excited to hear Dan propose reading Dawn of Everything, and I'm looking forward to participating. And I will call on Bjorn.
Hello, my name is Bjorn. I'm in Southern California, kind of going back between here and New York since the pandemic, but mainly in New York. I've been interested in David Graeber since Occupy Wall Street, when I was involved in that. And Bloomberg Business Week, of all magazines, put him on the cover back then, in 2011. And I never got to meet him, unfortunately, but I've enjoyed reading his books. I have to admit, I haven't finished any of them. I've started almost all of them. I haven't finished any of them, but got a lot from his writing in general. Obsidian, it's been really inspiring to me as software. I started looking at it maybe a year, I don't know, I think fairly early to it coming out, over a year ago. And I was researching kind of knowledge-based technologies in general for a project that I'm working on. And I've enjoyed using it. It's neat to see using it collaboratively for the first time. I'm curious how that goes. And I'm going to pass it to Evie.
Hi. I missed a lot of it because my internet was cutting out a bunch. But is my internet cutting out?
Nope, you're good.
Oh, okay. I'm Evie, and I am a graphic design student at Cal State San Bernardino. Obsidian is kind of, I mean, I used Roam before Obsidian, but before that, I didn't really take notes. I was one of those kids that just skated by remembering everything. And so, and I didn't really use Roam a lot either. And so it's like using Obsidian has been really interesting for me because while it's a tool that has, like, it is the first tool that really connected with how I think, it's still a tool that's difficult for me to use because I don't know how to take notes. And so I thought the Obsidian Book Club would be useful to just give me ideas and help me keep motivated with actually taking notes. Also because I've already been planning on reading this book since the Dawn of Everything was a book I've planned on reading for a while.
Cool.
I think that's it. I'd like to pass it on to Nsuli.
Thank you. So I'm based in Singapore, and what I've been up to the last couple of years has been a lot of activism and change making here. So my interest in Graeber is, I think I'm an anarchist at heart, and I really believe in decentralized organizational structures. Read half of Debt, really loved it. I love his writing. And yeah, I've been using Obsidian since the beginning of the year. I think I'm really a philosopher at heart as well. So I love exploring rabbit holes. And when I discovered Obsidian, it just seemed like the perfect tool to just jot down my thoughts, however imperfect they are, and kind of develop them over time. So yeah, really excited to be part of this book club. I'll pass it on to Ricardo.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Ricardo. I'm originally from Italy, as you can hear from my accent, probably. But I'm based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm a physics professor at Carnegie Mellon. I've been using Obsidian for the past maybe 6 months or so for my research and to take work notes. But I was curious to see how it would work to actually share a vault and do some collaborative work with other people, with an eye towards maybe using it for my research group or in a classroom setting. So in my spare time, I enjoy reading books that stretch a different part of my brain, and so the Don't Know Everything definitely falls into this category for me. But I personally had a hard time reading deeper books during the pandemic, working from home and with a small child. And so I also feel like I need some extra motivation to tackle this book. And so I'm really looking forward to just meeting regularly over the next few weeks with you guys. And I'll pass it on to Justin.
Hi, my name is Justin. I'm known Ricardo for, 10 years now, I think, that I'm at Syracuse University when we were grad students there. So I'm also a physicist by training, but have left academia and now I'm a software engineer at Waymo. So do a little different stuff from my background. I've used Obsidian also for the last 6 months for personal notes on projects I do around the house or my own software projects. And at work, I use Athens, which is another personal knowledge management tool. Seems to be working pretty well. Long time before that, I've used TiddlyWiki for a long time to keep notes and things like that. I wouldn't say any of them have worked out super successfully, so I'm kind of interested to see what I might pick up from you all in this. And then I was honestly more attracted to the book than the Obsidian note-taking system, so I'm interested to learn. Read that book because it fits in with several other history books I've read over the years. So I'm kind of really excited about the discussions we're going to have about that. I will pass it on to Kevin.
Yeah, hi, I'm in Melbourne, Australia, where it's early summer and the middle of the day. And I've taken a route that I think many of you have taken, beginning at Dynalist, going into Rome, then Obsidian, mainly as a knowledge worker to simply keep track of projects. But I've been increasingly interested in the collaborative nature of it. I'm with the World Crafts Council, and one of our main projects is an encyclopedia of craft. And we've been following a fairly orthodox process for that, getting specialists to write entries. But it seems that there's potential also to build a community of people around sharing that knowledge. So we started these knowledge weaving laboratories to explore the potential of Rome versus Obsidian for, I guess, doing what we're doing now, collaborating. And Rome seemed to be much better in terms of tracking individuals on the same database. But Obsidian seemed to be overall politically a much more stable kind of place to be and had a great community of people who are contributing to it. So what I'm interested in is to see how something like Obsidian can be used by people who don't have a proclivity to software, people who would like very easily to be able to share their knowledge in ways. So we've been using Trello as a kind of a front room where people post cards, and that gives a way in which people can at least contribute something. And then we have a few people, the knowledge weavers, who then put that into the Obsidian Vault. The idea being that the Trello provides the warp, which is the reference, the summary of the article or book. And within the Vault, we look at the weft, which are the links that connect these together. And that's already provided some very interesting and surprising connections. So there seems to be a lot of potential in this. And I already see that the way we're using tags, for instance, because Obsidian doesn't seem to be set up at all for commenting. But I guess the way in which you have to forge these practices together is very interesting to see how we do it. And the use of tags to begin with is interesting, as well as Dan, this thing of a relay introduction as well, which is quite good. And I think, Ashish, have we heard from you?
Sure, thanks, Kevin. Hi, everybody. My name is Ashish. By way of background, I'm from India, lived in the US for about 10 years, currently based out of the Philippines. My day job is in development economics. So we work with countries in Asia Pacific, helping solve the development needs. In terms of note-taking, varied experience, as all of you have said. I think Rome was an interesting discovery for me. I realized that I could do something beyond just capturing things. But currently, I'm more inspired by Obsidian. I have some challenges in transitioning the outliner mode, the block references. And I work a lot on PDF documents, and that's where both of these tools struggle. So I use Devonthink for my PDF knowledge base, but that doesn't serve well in terms of block referencing and backlinks. I mean, it has something on the margins. So my experiment with Obsidian started very early on. I think before I started with Rome and it was still in the beta phase. And I've kind of kept coming back and forth between Obsidian and other tools. But now, as was said, the community is much stronger. And I like that you can do a lot in terms of customization. Well, they're good and bad because I'm not a coder, I don't know programming, but I have to sometimes do things in JavaScript. So it's interesting. And my interest in philosophy is relatively recent. 2020, I started reading on Indian philosophy. And then when I saw Dan announce the book, I thought it would be it's a good continued engagement also for me to expand into some of the other unfamiliar parts of the history, at least where I'm concerned. And I have been reading, I'm still at chapter 1. I enjoyed the foreword, I enjoyed chapter 1. And I look forward to how we can collaborate using this tool and the Zoom meeting. So yeah, that's me. Thank you. Is anybody left? Oh, sorry, John. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm John from Austin, Texas, although I am currently in a hotel room in Portland, Maine. I'm a freelance copywriter, copy editor. I'm not an academic, although I do teach improv. Please don't hold that against me. I have only been using Obsidian for probably less than a month now. So like Mike, I am still finding my way in it. And I've already gotten some very useful tips just from looking at the material people have already posted in the vault. And as it happens, I had just started the book when I stumbled on this book group. So it felt destined to me. So I'm looking forward to discussing the book. The main reason I got Obsidian was not for any kind of professional projects. I'm kind of interested in, I'm currently in the process of taking years and years of journal entries, of personal journal entries, and dumping them into Obsidian and hoping that it will reveal maybe heretofore unseen links or patterns that I'm currently unaware of. And then I also have a writing project that I've been kind of messing around with for several years. And it takes the form of a lot of different kind of chunks that there's no clear sequence in which I can put them. And that's the barrier I keep coming up against. So I'm hoping that by kind of plugging them into Obsidian and starting to chart the different connections, that'll start to reveal some patterns and some sequence to me. And that's it for me. So Jason.
Hey guys, how's it going? My name's Jason. I live in Fresno, California. So if you eat food, it comes from where I live. So I've been using Obsidian for, I don't know, maybe about 6 months. And I'm not sure exactly how I found it, but once I did, I thought it was just finally a note-taking tool that I've been looking for a long time and really didn't know it. I can remember years and years ago setting up my own wikis just to take notes in my jobs because I was in technical stuff and I hated looking up written notes. So being with Obsidian, it's amazing the flexibility that it has. And I'm like John, I'm actually doing journaling in my Obsidian, connecting stuff, but I'm also doing projects. I find that I'm starting to bring it into my own work with Kanban boards and stuff. So it's kind of everything. And I like to read, and this book seemed really interesting to kind of be with a group of people. I always find reading with others totally makes the book way different. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to how Obsidian could look like in a collaboration. So there's a lot of interest that this seemed to kind of hit. So I was like, I'm just going to go for it. So glad to be here.
Cool. And I think, Ransom, you're last to introduce.
Yes. Hi, my name is Ransom Taylor. I'm a systems engineer. I live in Washington State. With my career, I've been doing a lot of work with what's called model-based systems engineering, which is representing models of systems that are engineered in ways that you can communicate them with others, and they've got a lot of links between things that might be difficult to retain across different versions of documentation. And so I also just have stumbled across some of the knowledge management stuff and Obsidian as well. And I really enjoyed kind of seeing some of that interlinkability between separate ideas that you're trying to link together to build a meaningful product out of it. So I've been using Obsidian for about 4 months-ish, not too long, but really enjoying it, using it as cookbook entry manager. I have a little recipe box in there that shows lots of interlinks between ingredients and different condiments and whatnot. So that's my main day-to-day utility, but I use it for lots of other journal note-taking and stuff. My interest in the book is mostly just because it's the subject of this book club. I have been reading a lot this year, but nothing quite like this. So I'm excited to kind of step outside my comfort zone and jump into this project. So I think that's about it for me.
Cool, thanks. I think that's everybody, right? So I will say a little bit, I guess, about what I've done in Obsidian with groups of people, because that sort of came up in the first meeting that we had earlier today. And so I guess what I would have to say is that mostly my students have used Obsidian to sort of consume content that I had produced for them. I teach survey courses as well as kind of upper level seminars and topics courses. And so in my surveys, I've actually sort of been leaning into not forcing the students to buy expensive textbooks and primary source readers, but instead to use open educational resources, OERs. And so I've actually begun kind of writing them myself. And so I did that for a modern world history course. I did it for my environmental history course, and I'm working on a couple of other projects. And so what I found was that the ebook platform that I was using, which is called Pressbooks, kind of creates a long scroll, basically. You know, an ebook if it doesn't have bells and whistles, and the version of Pressbooks that I was using was kind of it was kind of a lower tech version. It wasn't the fully featured one that had H5P interactive content and stuff. So it turned out to be, I thought, just a little bit too boring. And I was looking for, sort of that wiki style ability to, for students to navigate from place to place. And then also I was hoping that they would kind of find they'd find a use for it themselves. Right, and they would begin to use it to create their own notes and and begin to manage their own knowledge, because I've been really interested in this idea. I've also, as an historian, I was sort of trained as a subject matter expert, not really as a pedagogy guy. So I've been sort of racing to kind of backfill that. As I, in the last 4 years that I've been actually teaching at the university. And so I've been reading a lot, and I've been learning a lot about things like retrieval practice, right? Which is very, yeah, I think it is probably true of a lot of academics. We tend to kind of focus on our thing, and that doesn't necessarily make us the best at communicating it to others and making it kind of stick. And so retrieval practice is, sort of like, spaced repetition is a retrieval practice. So people who are into, personal knowledge management are kind of aware of it or adjacent to it in a lot of cases. But it's about sort of getting the information out of the students rather than just cramming more in. And so I was really interested in maybe trying to use Obsidian as a tool for that, where they would interact with it, they would navigate from page to page. There would be kind of questions at the end of a page, right, before they went on to the next one. And they would interact with those. And then ultimately I've never really 100% gotten to this, but my goal was for them to begin kind of co-creating the knowledge, right? So that I think that people in the vault have said, the graph is getting very cluttered, and maybe we want to reduce tags and reduce empty nodes and things. I'm all about the empty nodes, right? I double bracket everything, every keyword that I think I'm going to ever go back to, right? And because I like to see, and actually I'm really interested in those. John, I think you were saying, the patterns that are kind of revealed as you put this stuff in, and you realize that, yeah, I was thinking about that then, and there it is again over there. And so I've found some connections between different projects, different times in my, kind of my personal educational journey. But I haven't for the last 3 or 4 semesters I've been doing this with students, with undergrads, I haven't really, they've been very new at it. It's been brand new to them usually when I show it to them. I've had a couple who have repeated, taken more classes with me. And so, the second semester, the third semester, we go farther. I actually had one this semester in an upper level course who started actually taking notes on our seminar style class discussions in historiography, as we were having them. And so the graph was kind of filling as we were having these discussions. That was super cool. But, what I'm looking forward to in this is, a bunch of people who have more knowledge than I do on this, and different ideas about how they want to use it, and different kind of workflows, and seeing how that all fits together. I don't have a bunch of really predetermined ways that I want this to go, or that I want the vault and the graph to kind of evolve and look at the end and all of that. So I'm very much open to kind of seeing where that goes, and seeing how people feel about its development. I think we've had a little bit of back and forth in the community section there about how many plugins and what and how the look and feel of the thing was changing, and maybe was changing too frequently. And then and I think we got a solution with that nested folder thing in the Dropbox, and so that seems to be working for people. I think that this is I think that there's a certain amount of kind of parallel between the questions that Graeber and Wengrow are kind of dealing with and exploring in the book, and the way we're hopefully gonna collaborate in the vault and kind of develop our understanding of it. And some of that goes to kind of ideas about there have been some questions that came up in the first thing, and there have been kind of going back and forth in the vault about since then about sort of authority, right? And one of the things that I think as a historian that I've noticed, and actually I taught historiography this semester for the first time, and the idea of authority is interesting, right? Because we tend to believe that these great, these people who wrote about the great men, the kind of classical historians of, the era of kind of classical great man, master narrative kind of history, had more information, right? And in a lot of cases, they didn't, right? And especially as we get out of this first section and into the prehistoric sections of the book, you know, one of the things that Graeber and Wengrow are saying, I think, is that a lot of this stuff has been, to a great extent, kind of made up. And, you know, because there was a lack of solid facts, because a lot of it was before the beginning of recorded history, and there was nothing written down. There was a belief that there would never be anything written down, right? And so people felt free to indulge themselves in kind of mythologizing, right? And so we get myths of things like, you know, the Indo-European language group and the Aryan invasion, right? Which, you know, my friends in India are always they're always saying, you know, that wasn't really a thing. And so there's a lot of pushback on that. And actually, after, you know, in a kind of a post-colonial or a decolonization setting, there's a lot of pushback on a lot of those narratives that were kind of promulgated by the colonizers or by the imperialists. So anyway, that's kind of my perspective going into this, my hope. So we have some options now. We can talk about more about Obsidian and the vault and the way it's developing, or we can jump right into the first couple of chapters, because they do kind of go at this question of the indigenous critique. And you know, before they jump in the middle section, they're really spending a lot of time on prehistory. But this indigenous critique thing, and the idea that, you know, that the Enlightenment maybe owes a lot to this early contact is really was kind of surprising to me, at least in the volume of evidence they were able to bring to it. So Bjorn, you want to start us off with that?
I'm going to wait. I want to wait back a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
Just a second. Just a second. Let me get my dog taken care of. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, then we'll let Justin go, and then you can come back.
So there's actually, I kind of wanted to get a little more historical framing on that time period a little bit better. There's one passage kind of in the early part of chapter 2, I think, where they're talking about, like, kind of describing French society and how restrictive and constraining it was. And it sounded very alien to like today's life. And that was it. It was like one paragraph, and reminded me that I should really go and find my copy of A World Lit by Fire and read that, or something else, to really kind of make it clear to me the way, like the contrast between these two things. Because like I don't have an intuitive sense of what that would have been like to be confronted by this other alien society on the other side of an ocean. So I don't know, maybe somebody with a little more historical experience could enlighten me and the other people who are wondering the same thing, I think.
Okay, yeah. I think there's and they do say, Graeber and Wengrow say at one point that, and I think I've seen them saying it on a YouTube video as well, that it's probably much easier for us to understand the mindset of these native people who are critiquing the Europeans of the time than it would be to really kind of get inside the head. Although we think that our tradition comes right from these French, pre-Enlightenment people, and the people who developed, what we thought was this thinking. I think that the historical context in the late 16th century into the 17th century, this period that we're talking about of French contact with what was New France until 1763, is a period of, is really dominated to a great extent by Louis XIV, right? And this whole Counter-Reformation, right? That, so you've got, after 1519, you've got the Protestant Reformation, you've got Calvin in Switzerland, you've got Luther, you've got the Dutch, the the Spanish Netherlands breaking away, over the entire century, right? And so there's a lot of so the people who are really hanging on to Catholicism, the French, specifically, and also the Spanish, right? They finished their reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula in 1492, and Columbus comes over here into the Caribbean, and they also, they throw the Jews and the Muslims out, and they institute the Spanish Inquisition. So that, I think, is kind of a context that sort of explains a little bit, I think, the hierarchical nature. And then also Chris Aldrich was talking this morning about, kind of the great chain of being, which is ancient, right? It goes back to Aristotle, right? And this idea that, that everything in the visible universe is, part of this hierarchy, including people and their different classes and statuses within societies. And so it's a very kind of hierarchical world, and when they come over here, the Jesuits are very much, and the Franciscans too, very much about, converting the natives and saving their souls, even if they have to, to burn a few to do it.
So like that so the events and the people at play are all things I'm familiar with, but it still doesn't help me to understand, like, a Frenchman confronted with this new concept would like I don't know, I'm more sympathetic to the native argument, and it seems much more natural to me. So I'm not getting inside the head of the pre-Enlightenment intellectual sphere, which is the part I kind of want to get a little more insight into to see how foreign this was. But maybe we'll get there. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's difficult because I think even Jonathan Israel, who wrote this massive tome, Radical Enlightenment, that I realized I had it on my shelf. This is not the one that I read, so this was one that didn't have highlights in it yet. But I went through and I looked in it for La Hontan specifically, and Israel is all about this idea that that this radicalism comes. I mean, and he really attributes it to Spinoza, and he calls these people Spinozists. So there seems to be, and the thing that Graeber and Wengrow seem to be reacting to is this idea that it has to come from within, right? That this change, right? And some of these ideas, so that this synthesis that they're talking about Rousseau doing of this state of nature and kind of a fall from a kind of a state of grace, or a rushing to their chains kind of a moment, that people like Rousseau start talking about, seems to be about half coming out of Christian tradition, it seems to me, right? That there is this idea of a fall, right, in Christianity, and then they do try to kind of pin that. They do try to kind of create this smoking gun moment when Turgot talks to Madame de Graffinet, right, about her character that she's writing, and he says, well, we want her to decide that, to come back into the fold and to be conventional at the end of her journey. And then they say that then he creates this idea of social evolution as a counter argument, right? So that the native critique can't be legitimate because the natives aren't on the same level. They live in a simpler world, right? They can't understand the complexities that lead to these other things. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, I must say that the discussion around the first chapter regarding the question of whether those who've been captive sought to return or preferred to stay with them, I mean, Graeber has got some wonderful lines, and certainly, like with his book on debt, the idea that the value of what you do is inversely proportional to the amount that you're paid for it. These lines that are terrific, but then you step back and think, well, where's the evidence? Which is a different kind of process, and I guess it's the one we're doing, and which I think some of the people in the discussion who left their hashtags aren't with us. Maybe they were with the earlier session, but it's fantastic to see the different perspectives on that. And it just makes me think, within using something like a Zettelkasten technique, are we thinking about the possibility of then within each summary coming up with propositions, like abstracting from chapter 1 the proposition that those who were part of the native communities preferred to stay, and then sort of creating a bifurcation so that the thesis and antithesis of that can be then examined clearly. Is this, I mean, this perhaps is part of the process of working out the strategy of doing that, but I'm just wondering whether that's a useful step forward, and whether there's a process of how we identify what is going to be a Zettel.
That's a good question. Bjorn.
You're muted.
You're muted.
I was just giving it a thumbs up. I think it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I think there's yeah, I think it'll be that conversation, or that disagreement was kind of interesting to me, because I'm not I didn't feel as committed to kind of quantifying that and and kind of giving a thumbs up, thumbs down, I believe it, I don't believe it, kind of a response. I think that there's a wealth of kind of captivity and redemption literature in early American literature, and I think that it's there for a reason. I think maybe the as we go through that, and I think that the conversation that we seem to be having in the vault so far seems to be working fairly well. I don't know that we have to, kind of come up with a consensus. It would be interesting if people, if people wanted to propose something.
I'm not talking about a consensus, but just a way in which the differences can be at least seen. I think for most of these claims, you're going to find that it's a bit of one, a bit of the other. Mm-hmm. Certainly it's the case for these sorts of stories in Australia and New Zealand as well. Very, very similar to what happened in the States with colonization. Yeah. But just to be able to focus on those particular claims might be useful.
Yeah. I think the big one really is that there is something, there's something of choice about it and not natural. Right, because that seems to be the thing that is missing in a lot of these earlier accounts, is this idea. Even when the French say, "Oh, Candiaronk is brilliant; he's the smartest guy ever," there's an assumption that he's just that way because he's gifted, right, and not that he's trained in a different way. All right. So this whole idea that I think Wengrow and Graeber are getting at, that a lot of these things, may have been choice and may not have been natural, noble, savage kind of things. Go ahead, Mike.
Got to unmute myself. Yeah, maybe I didn't fully understand what Kevin was saying, but one thing I thought I heard him say was that we come up in the book club with a convention for putting settles in the vault, mm-hmm. and distinguishing a formal kind of claim from a less formal literature note, or whatever you want to call it. I guess I have to assume everyone here has read Sanka Ahrens's How to Take Smart Notes, so I'm kind of using his framework. Mm-hmm. And if we take his framework, then there's going to be something like a zettel or a permanent note. And that's distinct from what I think I've seen in the vault so far. That's something that I was trying to encourage the book club of Rome users to do. And my interpretation of what Maggie was doing was that she, in her own way, was building on that. And I found, this is just my personal experience, that it increased the rigor of my thinking, because I had to decide what ideas were connected with what other ideas.
Mhm.
And then we can have a claim like most white settlers did not want to return to European settlements, whereas most Amerindian captives wanted to return to their native origins. Then within that claim, we can go back and forth. But there's reasons to support that claim, and there are reasons to oppose that claim. But let us formalize that claim, and then we can ask the question why, or what is the evidence for, and we can ask the question, what is the evidence against? That's something that I'm doing personally. I find it extraordinarily helpful. Having made that comment about the book club, I do want to say a couple of things about chapter 1 and 2. Would you prefer me to wait, or should I say that now?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Even at the beginning, I'm just intrigued by the book. I love what they're saying, but I am frustrated. I find it a little bit infuriating reading this book because they seem to be all over the place. The very first sentence says something like, most of history is lost to us. I mean, what the fuck? Because, a few pages later, they say, we are creating a new science of history.
Mhm.
I mean, is that bold or what? It's certainly not a very modest view of what their project is. A new science of history. Oh, and by the way, nobody really understands what's going on. And we don't have much data upon which to create our new theory of society.
Yeah.
So that's I find these guys, I'm partial to them. I want them to be right. I want them to succeed. But when I start to use what I was just talking about, create rigorously or as rigorously as I can, given the material they provide me. Okay, what are they saying?
Mhm.
Let me extract the key ideas and the support for those ideas.
Mhm.
We're going to create a new science of history. Great.
Yeah. Well,
what is their theme? Their theme, as I take it, seems to be that unlike existing theories of history, which say that social formation is an effect of some non-social property of the world, like the environment or geography or technological development, right? Those are the Western European responses to the native Indian critique. What did they come up with? They said social structure is the effect of non-social forces like technology, geography, or the environment. And what they have said so far in chapters 1 or 2, I can't remember which one, is, I think it was chapter 1, is that we are products of self-creation. Okay, I'm all for that. What they're putting forward is an idea of autonomy. We create ourselves as opposed to what you could call heteronomy. We are the products of something external to ourselves. And I would love to see them give a rigorous and cogent argument supporting that. But I just, just from the very beginning, they seem to be a little bit all over the place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, remember, one of them is an anthropologist. And so I think that it would have been it will probably end up being a better book for Wengrow's being there than it would have had Graeber been doing this all on his own, because it will at least be a little bit grounded. The science that they want to bring to it, I think, is archaeology, right? Because anthropology is, and I'm going to betray my own prejudices here, right? Anthropology kind of lives in that kind of no man's land between data and theory. And so as a historian, I often feel kind of frustrated with these with the ways that theory comes first in anthropology, and oftentimes in sociology and political science and economic history and other fields like that. John.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer what's maybe a small minority point of view, because it does seem like at least a lot of the folks in this group are academics. I'm not an academic. And so to put it bluntly, I don't care if they're right or not. And furthermore, I'm totally unqualified to assess their methodology, right? So I can completely understand why if you're a professional historian and their methodology is driving you nuts, that would actually, or their presentation is driving you nuts, that would produce a response. And I think what both Kevin and Mike are talking about, I would benefit from it, but I'm not going to participate in it. This is not a research project for me, right? I'm going to benefit from your more rigorous examination of it. For my part, I personally am more interested in people's personal impressions of this and personal reactions to what, might as well be a thought experiment. I find, the evidence they marshaled in the first couple of chapters, I'm like, wow, that seems pretty likely. But any of you is qualified to say, yes or no to that to me in a way that I might find equally compelling. So I don't think it's an either or argument at all. And I think that's one of the virtues of Obsidian. But I just want to make the case for those of us who might be more interested in a more free-flowing and less structured approach. And I feel those things can exist simultaneously. There's no reason to reduce it to one or the other. But I would definitely be just as interested in people kind of having personal reactions to the book. Those are as well.
I think it might be more valuable as mythology for public consumption, because and really, I mean, this is a thing that happens when academics write trade press books, right? So there's a change that happened. I mean, there is an article that I put in, I don't know, I put it someplace in the vault, in the previous, and other things to look at, or some we gotta figure out our names for things at some point. But there's a 2015 article that Wengrow and Graeber wrote about it uses the same buzzword, right? The dawn of the childhood of humanity kind of thing. And so I think that's much more rigorous, and that is cited by 57 subsequent journal articles by academics and stuff. So I think that they are engaging at that level, but this isn't the venue in which they're going to do that, right? And so the thing that they're doing here is different. So I'm interested in this kind of as a I guess as a Zettelkasten exercise. I sort of disagree with Aaron's a little bit about what Luhmann was doing with his statements. And so the permanent notes equal, definitive atomic, kind of statements thing is something that I haven't completely adjusted my thinking to, but we can come back to that. Unsu, it's your turn.
I just wanted to add my minority voice to John's as well as a non-academic. I don't need to know 100% for sure that what they're saying is true to just appreciate the fact that they pointed out to me that Rousseau wrote his books as part of a competition. I mean, that was like totally new information for me, and completely turned my head around. And then even just calling the Native Americans the American intellectuals, just the way they use language is it just opens up possibilities of thinking. But I do appreciate being able to test their rigor as well. So, if other people here have that competence to be able to do that, I would also benefit from that. I also do think there is some value. I would like to see people being able to pull out propositions or truth claims from the book. That would be a very useful map for me to go through. So enjoying the conversation so far.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. They said in an interview someplace that authoritative seeming scholarly interventions don't often get characterized as, here comes this is this expert's neoliberal approach to this issue, right? You do here, and that review by Immerwahr, Daniel Immerwahr in The Nation was a great example of, it's all about them, it's all about Graeber being an anarchist, right? I mean, he spent more time talking about that than he did about the book. So, so there's a little bit of that going on too. Greg.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I'm taking this from like an English literature perspective and also history. So I can respect the academic side of this text. I mean, if you look at the bib, I mean, it's just amazing. I want to copy it and go through it and hunt down some of the stuff through ILL. But no, as a piece of literature, it's the discourse that it's creating is creating this change in the dominant narrative that, the Enlightenment is kind of an isolated Western event, and then we find out that no, maybe it's not, right? Although I don't necessarily agree with that, saying that it all comes from the New World, but rather maybe it's this discourse between two different sides of the world, and you have some European contexts that aren't quite talked about, and then there are, of course, the North American context as well that are quite interesting. So, anyways, that's my 2 cents.
Thanks. Bjorn, you're up.
Also not an academic at all. I definitely too want to hear people who, all of you who are very knowledgeable in different areas to point out when things are, overstated or incorrect. And I'm sure there will be tons of that. I know Graeber's been hit on some mistakes before in the past. I do think, at least from the early chapters, which I've only read the first couple too, there is that an interesting part where early on where they're talking about Steven Pinker and his sort of cherry picking of this one person.
Woodsy, the Iceman, yeah.
Yeah, the Iceman, and they talk about, well, we can give an example that is a counterexample, but that's not even the point. And I just want to read a little quote. They say, we just want to point out how easy it would be to play the same game the other direction. Easy, but frankly not too enlightening. As we get to grips with the actual evidence, we always find that more realities of human social life were far more complex and a good deal more interesting. I think what I'm trying to get is, I think maybe mythology is too strong a word. I'm sure they're going to make mistakes, but it seems, at least from this introduction to me, that they're trying to there's kind of a theme of what we're trying to say is that human society has been waves and complex, multi-faceted structures. Not that we know the real origin. They're saying there wasn't a real origin. It's a stew or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that I mean, and it does. I guess in the sense of Zettels, you know, I'm looking at the chat in the sidebar here too. You know, making positive statements. I guess the way that I think of that, and I'll come to you in just a sec, Evie. I see you. The way that I guess I'm thinking of that is in terms of, you know, what will I change about my course in mid-January when I started again. And so there are some things, and I guess that would qualify, right, as, okay, those are positive statements that I'm going to say. Okay, it wasn't inevitable that stored surplus of grains, right, led inevitably and immediately to hierarchy and city-states and armies and, you know, all of these things that we've been told and that I've been telling my students. Thanks, Ashish. See you next time. And so I do think that yeah, that maybe that qualifies as Zettels, and maybe maybe we should think of a way to identify them and call them out and make them visible that way. Go ahead, Evie.
Oh, I'm not especially an academic. I'm still like in school, but I'm in that part of school where you're mostly just like, you know, doing work, getting ready for actually finishing school. So I haven't been really coming at this from an academic position. And I don't know. I've been enjoying reading it as a new perspective. I mean, even some of the basic stuff they brought up is stuff that I never really encountered in school. And while I'm someone who actively tries to read positions outside of what I grew up with, because I felt like it was important I wanted to get that diversity of opinion. Not to mention that as someone who is an anarchist, I wanted to essentially like break out of the framework of that I was educated in, and I would intentionally try to read positions that did not agree with what I grew up with. Even then, like things as basic as like actually the meritocracy like in government that we have came from the Chinese was something that I never even heard about growing up. And I just thought that was interesting, especially it's like I am someone who's very young. I'm 22, and even at this age, I still didn't learn that.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that there's so much that is invisible about kind of the master narrative, right? And you know, and the culture that that we're sort of embedded in. And I don't want to go all postmodern on y'all here, but you know, it's. You know, that they can be doing us. I mean, even if they're not right about all the details, right? And that they're not convincing about, you know, this one-off of Romito 2 isn't any better than, you know, you're right, than the one-off that Pinker does of Ötzi. But Pinker gets away with it for a decade, right? Before somebody calls him on it, right? Because he's doing it from within this mainstream master narrative. Right, they get called on it immediately for calling it off.
I actually never heard of Steven Pinker until recently when a YouTube video came up critiquing Steven Pinker came up. So my first impression of Steven Pinker, my first introduction to him was a YouTube video like breaking down his books and debunking them. And it's like, so I guess I never came up into thank you, Maggie. Glad to know that I should stay away from him then.
Well, the better nature of the better angels of our nature one, he kind of skated with that, but then when he sort of doubled down in Enlightenment Now, and that really created a backlash. But go ahead, Mike.
I just wanted to point out that although I have a background in academia, I have no connection to any academic institution at the moment, but I will still express my viewpoint that I get huge benefits out of reading texts and extracting the arguments from them. Now, if I'm reading a bullshit text, I'm going to get almost no value out of that, and I don't put the effort into it. But if I'm reading something that's important to me or that I believe is important to me, then yeah, I'm going to do the work to say, what am I getting out of this book? Why? Because that's for me, I've worked with a lot of people in the last almost 2 years. And I see them taking notes for the various book clubs that I've been a participant in. And what I see people doing is extracting a bunch of statements. For me, the real joy, but the really hard work is which of these statements connect to which other statements and how do they connect? Because it's always the case that they occur at different levels of analysis. And if I don't do the work, which is really hard work, it's not easy for me to figure out, okay, where do these points lie in a hierarchy? I know that's a word we're going to deal with a lot in the next few weeks, but these statements have a different kind of logical status when you compare them. And some are superordinate and some are subordinate. And what is the relation between these statements? To me, that is why I'm using a note system. And I didn't do that until I started attempting to do some kind of slip box or whatever you call it. And I don't see Sonka Arendts talking about this at all in his book.
Yeah.
He doesn't. He talks about, yeah, you want to know what the argument is, but he doesn't tell you how to use his Zettelkasten method to extract arguments.
Right.
That's not in his book. But I'm going to suggest this has nothing to do with academia. I've been in business for decades. And when you run a business, you have to figure out what you're going to do. Now, you can just roll the dice, or you can say, these are the reasons. Well, that's
and you can, and
that's a structure.
Yeah, and you can find, and you have to ask yourself, where's the value?
Right. And that's exactly what Konderant was doing, right? That's the whole point of chapter 2.
Yeah.
This guy wasn't, they said, there's all kinds of rhetorical devices. And he was using rational logic to argue for the superiority of the native way of living over the European way of living. And that was what that dialogue was about. Here is a claim. Here are the reasons why this claim is defective.
Yeah.
So I'll put that out there.
Yeah.
Well, I would suggest that maybe we want to talk a little bit about chapter 2, where he talks about, I hate this word evolutionary. They use the word evolution, and I personally don't, if you take evolution in a Darwinian sense, it's not teleological.
Right.
Right. And they use evolution in the sense of progress, directionality. I don't like that.
Spencerian sense.
Yeah. So I don't like that they use that word, but I mean, I guess I have to accept it. But, the point that they made in chapter 2 was really new to me and really exciting. What they said is that the concept of freedom came from outside of Europe. This was an Amerindian, I've never used that word before, but I'm trying, I don't know if we should say, I don't like just saying American because it's just so confusing. That's not what American means in any other context in this book club. But all right, the Native Americans are the ones who formulated this notion of freedom, and that to counter the Native American critique of Europe, European thinkers developed this notion of progress.
Mhm.
And they said that radical notions of freedom are going to inhibit the development of progress, or at least that's what I took the argument in chapter 2 to be. This notion of progress was created as a response to the native critique of Europeans' lack of freedom. And I've just never seen that before. I mean, I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I was used to seeing the natives come in 100 years later, right? When Ben Franklin looks at, the Iroquois Confederacy and their councils, and then in 1754, he proposes, this thing that kind of is based on their structures, and so, but this, pushing this back a whole century, I think is huge. What I'm struck with is kind of that idea, that image of the Jesuits, right, who kind of come to America, imagining themselves to be the Jesuits, right? These people who are renowned for their scholarship and scholasticism and their ability to win every argument, right? And yet are living embedded in this set of assumptions that are completely invisible to them, right? And then somebody like Kandiaronk comes along and blows them out of the water, because he can, because he can say, yeah, you're not really arguing from first principles here. And I think it's
no, but this idea of progress opposing freedom, like I've always thought of progress as having essential to its meaning the expansion of freedom. Isn't that what progress is? I don't want to get too crazy here, but I think a Hegelian would say, that is part of progress, the growth of freedom. We can become less restricted by the world and more autonomous.
Well, I think it was interesting. One of the things that really resonated with me that I have to think more about is this idea that they, I think it was in the chapters or it was in some of the things that they said on YouTube, that we think of these, especially a lot of this rights talk and liberty and individuality talk only in individual terms, right? Individual natural rights, individual freedoms. And they don't really work that way. They don't really exist that way. They exist in relationship, right? And so that's another, kind of complexity like that actually interests me a lot. But I think you're right. I think that but this idea of progress and of teleology, right, comes out of, I think, a European Christian tradition. Right, it's sort of baked in, and is part of that, that water that, as Europeans they're swimming in without knowing that they're swimming in, right? And so the idea, so it seems natural to say, well, there is progress, right? There is a direction. I mean, and this is a new thing, right? And that's a thing that that when you read about the Enlightenment, right? That's this other, this other thing that they tell you is that, oh, this is a new thing, right? That there's change, right? And that we're not living in this cyclical world anymore. We're living in a world that is going in a direction that is evolving, right? Or improving or progressing, right? And that this is some type of innovation.
Come in there about the issue of freedom, and what the authors seem to do in their rhetoric, which I think is very effective, is it's kind of a deconstruction, but it opens up the other side of these terms we may take for granted. And in chapter 1, they talk about security and what security means. And it may be that you want laws that protect you from being harmed by others as a form of security, but then they raise the question of, well, what about the security of having people around who would care if you were harmed, which is obviously something missing from a very technocratic society like ours. where you might have the laws to enforce these things, but not the community to be able to support that. And, I think that move, maybe it's an anarchist move, but I think it's a very effective one in chapter 1.
Yeah.
I was just gonna mention something that Kevin, so you said made me think of this, was that I'm also really interested in this idea of progress as an engineer, and especially as an engineering professor, because I'm, trying to motivate my students to want to be engineers, but I actually have a lot of ambivalence about a lot of the narratives around engineering, about, designing our future, and also just how toxic a lot of Silicon Valley is. No offense to anyone here, but yeah, that is just a really big thing. And people talk about also just like about the inevitability of technology, and it can be like really demoralizing. So yeah, trying to think about how to navigate that is another reason I'm really excited to read this book. I don't feel like I have any answers, but I taught this inclusive engineering design class, and I had to start to read some stuff about this, but the transhumanism, the like we're gonna go to Mars kind of attitude is like much more prevalent in engineering, and something I'm trying to find real ways to counter, but like with real evidence, not just saying, well, the world could be different, but like maybe we could actually show that. So, and there's also a lot of like futurism or like Afrofuturism and science fiction that's trying to do that as well. So I've also been reading a lot of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that Daniel Immerwahr, the guy who wrote the takedown in The Nation, has also written extensively about Dune and about Frank Herbert's influences. But that's just an aside. Justin.
So I wanted to bring it back to something I was trying to figure out how to bring into this about a background thing that's totally unmentioned in chapters 1 and 2, but like in 1650, I suppose there must still be Native Americans at the time that either knew of or had recently experienced like some aspect of population decimation from disease in their people. And I read 1491, and there's debate about what the range of the impact, the number of people who died because of that, to be blunt about it. And it must be an aspect in their new traditions, or the changing ways they decide they need to care about each other, or how you decide you can't enforce things because or what. But anyway, it's totally unmentioned, and I feel like it's a huge missing hole. And Dan, with your history, maybe you could add a little more, or somebody else, if anybody else has any reactions to that and they just want to share how they felt about it, that'd be cool too.
He does talk about Pinker in chapter 2, I think, who says, look, we decimated this native population, and he seems to think that's progress, but he doesn't put it in racist language. He calls it Western civilization. But in the past, they would have said whites.
Yeah. I think I think that it's interesting. You mentioned 1491, right? And Charles Mann, again, not an academic, actually just a really, really good journalist, right? Who I never happened to meet when I lived in Amherst, which was really weird. But he's bringing to the public, some things that people like Alfred Crosby and Dobbins and others had been talking about. I think 90 to 95% is the number. Starting from 1491. I'm sorry, Kevin. 1491 is a book by Charles Mann that basically talks about the conditions before 1492, and then sort of sets the scene for what the Americas were like, and then along come the Spanish and epidemic disease, and 90 to 95% of the population disappear. And even people, writing for the public, even I mean, all of this change has happened. All this change in understanding has happened. It happened in my lifetime. I guess it's a long time ago now in my students' minds, because in the 70s, Alfred Crosby wrote the Columbian Exchange, and it took him a while to get it published. And he sent that out to people, and no academic press would actually print that book. And so it was hard arguing against the superiority of the conquistadors. But when you ask yourself, how can 60 fighting men overthrow an empire of 11 million in South America? It's Evie. I'm sorry, I've been talking too long. Go ahead.
No, I was enjoying it. I was actually, I had something to say about the side conversation that Maggie Delano brought up about like the future. Oh, hi, Kat. About like, like inevitability and all that or like the forward march of progress, especially something like this attitude you see, especially now, where it's like, technology will move us forward. And what was something that was interesting to me was that also like, this is something that's very shaped by Western values as well. And it's something that like, it is something that occurred to me when reading the book. I think I highlighted it, was that the narrative before the Enlightenment, I think he mentioned it as well, that actually the way society shaped was that it was a constant series of like, trying to reclaim your former glory, where there was a perfect civilization, or like a perfect state of knowledge gifted by God that has kept on having a decline, and then trying to return to that. And it was so interesting to me, where it's like, if that was the dominant Western narrative, then how did we go from that to this modern sense of, instead we are always marching forward with progress and everything is always improving, which is also wrong. I think both are wrong, but they're different.
Yeah. Kevin is going. Thanks, Kevin. I will. And so Ricardo.
Yeah, so I have a question. So as a non-historian, it struck me that the account of Lao Tan and Kandiaron was doing a lot of work in the narrative, in the sense, a lot of weight was assigned to this, to the story. And so I was wondering if anyone, you then or anyone else, could put a bit into perspective this bit of historical evidence and comment on how it compares to historical evidence in other books that typically deal with this period in history. I understand that, of course, we have fewer accounts and information about this period, but how solid it is compared to, say, information, data, and facts that can be found in books, say, like 1491, for example.
Yeah, I think it's just becoming visible that, and there are places where it's very obvious that there were large populations and then there weren't, right? And so, for example, also in the 70s, Howard Zinn, in the first chapters of A People's History, really goes after Columbus as a genocidal maniac, and talks about the Caribbean, talks about specifically Hispaniola and Cuba, and their populations going in a generation from 1 million or 2 million people to dozens. But even then, he leans, I mean, in the late 70s, he leans very heavily on, on the Spanish accounts of Bartolome de las Casas, who was appalled by the death and destruction of that, of the Taino culture, but had no idea about disease, right? And so was only able to attribute it to, the brutality of the Spaniards, who, were probably pretty darn bad. There's nobody who really makes the case that they weren't, but, not in necessarily the same, get down, buddy, in the same genocidal way that maybe, that Zinn suggested. And then there are other places where we didn't, until just recently, we didn't know. Like, for example, after he helps conquer the Incas, De Soto sails up and lands in Florida and goes all around, in a dozen or so of what become the southeastern states of the United States, and then dies, for between 1539 and 1542. He dies of fever in 1542. Every place he goes, he records that, he travels along rivers and it's thickly settled. And then 100 years goes by and no European goes there until La Salle floats down the Mississippi River from the Ohio River, right? And in 1670, and the place is empty. He sees nobody, right? And so, historians for the longest time had never put two and two together and realized that something happened between 1539, 1540 and 1670, right? And so there's a lot like that. Now, the thing that they do in the second chapter with, is it in the second chapter they talk about Cahokia, or is that later on? It may be later on. Later on, yeah. Okay. There are a lot of things that they do that I think are, sort of add complications, don't necessarily answer all the questions, but raise questions that I think are really important. Evie.
Oh, I never put my hand down. Whoops.
Oh, okay. All right, then Greg, over to you.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's interesting too about books like Graeber and Wengrow's Dawn of Everything is that it also opens up a conversation. Look how long we've been talking about this too. I think that's one of the values of it is that they're synthesizing a bunch of information that a lot of specialists know, which I think is really cool. And of course, a lot of us who aren't the specialists are getting to see some of this information. And I know it's kind of a change of subject, but it's kind of an interesting thing is we're able to use books like this as a conversation starter, and not necessarily how do I say it, like some of my undergrads, they like to think like, oh, you read the book and you take it with you just take it what they say to you and just maybe think a couple of things about it and then leave it. But in this, I think is especially for our note-taking exercise, we can use it as a way to maybe expand on some things, maybe tease out some stuff we already know, right? Get those conversations rolling in the Obsidian vault, so to speak. So
yeah, and one of the things that I'm really fascinated about is because obviously from where I'm sitting, there are some specific things that I'm interested in, right? But I'm really very interested in Mike and Justin and and what and what John was talking about before he left, just these kind of other areas that that you think are places that we ought to be kind of focusing our attention. So I think we've sort of run out of time. I think that one of the things that as a kind of a takeaway that that it's occurred to me that we need to think about in the vault a little bit is how we move from sort of questions and provocations and discussion of these things to, do we want to actually collectively try to produce positive statements, kind of Zettel statements. Go ahead, Bjorn.
I have a general proposal idea, which is just simply having folders per chapter versus one note per chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we can go branch off on more directions that way and not feel so constrained by having one note for each chapter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then maybe we can, we'll be able to kind of follow threads from one to the other rather than just having to have a inline discussion about one topic, one argument in a long note. Yeah.
Yeah, I think at some point we will have ideas that are kind of meta. But I do think that might be a good place to just start that way, and because you can always make it more complicated. But as I was reading this chapter, this is a thing that came up. I can always reference that note in a different chapter. I think that's a good way to start.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Cool. Then, anybody want to have the last word?
I think my brain's still absorbing everything that just happened.
Just want to say thanks, Dan, for setting this up.
You bet. This is fun. This has been a blast for me. So I really appreciate all of you being willing to take your time to do this. I'm having fun, and now now my semester's over. I actually turned my grades in this morning, so now I can really kind of focus some energy. So I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, I love your cat.
Oh, thank you. He's I'm gonna have to feed him before I turn in because he's getting into things now. Yeah, he's really getting into things. All right, cool. Well, thanks very much for taking the time and being here. And
thank you.
See you in the vault, and then again in a week or less than a week. We're gonna meet on Thursday, right?
Oh,
yep.
Thursday.
Right.
I hadn't heard that. I hadn't seen that yet. Okay, we can talk about it.
Okay, I think we will. I'll put that in the vault, and we can talk about it too.
Okay,
perfect.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.